Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Tuesday, the 26th of January. In McShane's readings, we read Matthew chapter 26 today. And just giving it a quick overview, we see the human beings that Jesus worked with. It starts off with the Sanhedrin plotting against him. We expect that. He's had nothing but problems with them all along. And then he goes to the home of Simon the leper and has a meal. And while he's there, a woman comes and anoints him. And we're told the disciples, when they saw this, were indignant. Why this waste? This could have been sold and the money given to the poor. We're told elsewhere that Judas particularly said that because he wanted to get his hands on the money. What the other disciples' motivations are, we're not sure. But up to this point, we had not seen a great missionary outreach from the disciples in terms of looking after the poor. So what was going on there, we're not sure. But Jesus says, no, this woman has done the right thing. And it just says to me, don't judge too quickly because the disciples did and they got it wrong. Judas goes out from there and agrees to betray Jesus. And we need to remember, he was a disciple. He'd been with Jesus for 3 years. He'd heard the teaching from Jesus' lips. He'd seen the miracles himself. And yet he agrees to betray him. And sometimes we're tempted to think, oh, if only we heard Jesus speaking, if only I'd seen that, my life, my faith would be so much stronger. That's not necessarily true. Our humanity will intrude in all sorts of places. They move on to the Last Supper, and Jesus says to the disciples, the shepherd will be struck and the sheep will be scattered. You're all going to desert me. And they say, oh, no, we're not going to desert you, never. And Peter says, they all might, I'm good. And Jesus says, tonight you'll disown me 3 times. He says, not a chance. Even if I have to die with you, I'll never disown you. And the other disciples say the same thing. We know that that's not how it turned out, but they were making these glib promises. They go to the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus says to Peter, James, and John, please pray with me. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And then he goes off and prays. And so what do? They fall asleep. He comes back, wakes them up, goes off again, and they fall asleep. The crowds arrive to arrest Jesus, and Peter immediately jumps to action, pulls out a sword, gets it completely wrong, and starts fighting, attacks the people, chops off this high priest's servant's ear, and Jesus stops him and says, no, I wanted to stop this. I'd call my Father to send angels. Peter clearly got it completely wrong. And off Jesus goes to the trial, and we can imagine Sanhedrin, it's a twisted trial, no justice whatsoever, but that's what we expect. And as that's happening, Peter goes with, and a servant girl asks him, aren't you a disciple? And he denies it 3 times. And I just struck reading this passage how human everybody is. There is nobody that comes out smelling of roses. And as you read through the scriptures, that just doesn't happen. Why? Because it's full of people. And people like me are full of problems and contradictions and weakness. And that is portrayed. And there's 2 encouragements. The one is it just says that the Bible's a realistic representation of what happened. Not because somebody invented a good story, but because that's what happened. If you go back to the great tales of antiquity, people were often, particularly early Christian writing, they got it wrong and they started portraying people as saints. These weren't saints, these were ordinary people that we're looking at here. People like me and probably like you. And that's a second encouragement, that God can use flawed people to do his work. So be encouraged in that and know that we'll never be perfect, but God doesn't expect us to be. He expects us to be available, and he will work through us despite our imperfections. So be encouraged by that, and as you walk with God, know that he's present despite our failings and that we are blessed.